Hey guys, tonight we're drifting back to a time when Alexandria wasn't just a city, it was the city. Marble streets shimmer under the Mediterranean moonlight, the scent of cardamom and ink lingers in the breeze, and you're standing at the edge of the ancient world's most ambitious idea, a place where all human knowledge could be gathered, stored, and shared. Sounds kind of cozy, right? Well, hold that thought, because the night we're exploring tonight ends in smoke, ash, and the kind of historical heartbreak that'll make you want to hug your e-reader. Spoiler, you probably wouldn't have survived this day, especially if you were fond of scrolls or had strong opinions about decimal classification systems. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's always fun to see how history crosses time zones. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The city of Alexandria doesn't so much greet you as it envelops you, like walking into a fog of culture, ambition, and warm saffron bread. It's the 3rd century BCE, and the streets are busy with merchants shouting in Greek, Egyptian, Hebrew, and languages that haven't even been fully translated today. You shuffle past traders with glass bottles from Syria, ivory from Nubia, and scrolls, so many scrolls, wrapped in linen, perfumed, and stamped with wax seals from far-flung corners of the known world. You're not here for the fish markets, though tempting. You're headed inland toward the district that scholars whisper about like it's a temple. In a way, it is. The Library of Alexandria isn't just a building, it's a cathedral of curiosity. Columns stretch so high, you swear they're holding up the sky itself. And inside? The air is thick with the musty perfume of parchment. Old ink and dried lavender used to ward off bugs. Somewhere, a scribe sneezes, and a chorus of annoyed murmurs follows. This isn't just some musty reading nook. It's a full-blown scholarly utopia. You tiptoe past rooms where philosophers argue about the shape of the universe while casually ruining each other's reputations. Over there, a linguist is teaching parrots to speak Aramaic. Because sure, why not? And someone in the corner is using a primitive form of lenses to burn holes into old manuscripts, for research, allegedly. Here's a mainstream historical fact. The Library of Alexandria was commissioned by Ptolemy I, one of Alexander the Great's successors, around the 3rd century BCE. He wanted to turn Alexandria into the intellectual jewel of the world, and it worked for a while. With the help of scholars like Demetrius of Phaleron and Eratosthenes. Yes, the guy who calculated the Earth's circumference with a stick and a shadow, talk about overachieving, Alexandria became the place where human knowledge was gathered, translated, and debated. Now here's your quirky tidbit. The librarians were so aggressive about collecting books that any ship entering Alexandria's harbour was required, by law, to hand over all written materials on board. These scrolls would be copied by the scribes, and the originals were often kept, with the owners receiving a lovely thanks for your donation note and a shoddier copy. Historians still argue whether this practice made Alexandria a beacon of preservation or the ancient world's most elegant intellectual kleptomaniac. As you wander deeper, you realise this place isn't just impressive, it's strange. The scrolls aren't arranged alphabetically. They're not even sorted by subject in a way that makes sense to your poor modern brain. No Dewey Decimal System here. Instead, scrolls are grouped by author's ethnicity, form, and sometimes even astrological sign. This is what happens when a city decides to collect everything without fully deciding how to handle it. But oh, the voices you'd hear in these halls if the walls could talk. Conversations in ancient Sanskrit, philosophical debates in Koine Greek, lost comedies that would have made modern sitcoms seem like cave paintings. Alexandria was a crossroads of knowledge and ambition, where people believed that if you could understand everything, you could control everything. You sip some watered wine and try not to trip over a tortoise, slowly making its way across a mosaic floor. No one moves it. It's apparently part of an experiment. You pause to watch a young student meticulously copy a Babylonian tablet onto papyrus, his lips silently sounding out a language that hadn't been spoken in centuries. You wonder, do these people know they're making history? Or do they just think they're late for a presentation on planetary retrograde? As you settle into a corner of the reading room, yes, there are cushions. You realise you've entered a time that feels both impossibly advanced and charmingly naive. These people think they can hold the universe in their hands if they just write fast enough. And maybe they can, for now, because of course you know what they don't. One day, all of this, the knowledge, the scrolls, the parrot that now only recites philosophy, will vanish. But not yet. For now, you're here. And the air hums with the quiet rustle of papyrus. Every page is a heartbeat, every scroll a whisper across time. You lean back against the cool stone of the library's inner sanctum, letting the low murmur of scribes and scholars wrap around you like a wool blanket spun from language itself. It's here, among the towering shelves and ink-stained desks, that Alexandria's most ambitious minds try to answer questions the rest of the world hasn't even thought to ask. You'd expect arguments about politics, or maybe whether olives are a fruit or a vegetable, but instead someone's ranting about whether numbers are real, or just the fever dream of particularly organised philosophers. The head librarian, let's call him Zenodotus for now, because that was in fact the name of one of the early ones, glides past in his linen robes, trailing the scent of dried myrrh and, weirdly, figs. His job isn't just to guard scrolls, but to guard ideas. He's responsible for sorting through myths, poetry, astronomical charts, and texts, so ancient even their own creators weren't quite sure what they meant. He doesn't smile often, but you catch the edge of one when he passes a young woman eagerly sketching diagrams of how fish might breathe underwater. You assume gills come into it somewhere. Here's a mainstream historical fact. The Library of Alexandria may have held up to 400,000 scrolls at its height. Some say even more. The goal wasn't just to preserve knowledge, but to own it. The Ptolemaic dynasty wanted to outshine Athens, conquer knowledge the same way Alexander had conquered cities, with flair, ambition, and a little bit of poetic overkill. And to do that, they needed a library not just of books, but of everything. Sanskrit epics, get them. Egyptian medicine, copy it. Phoenician trade ledgers, why not? It's data. But remember that ship law we talked about? That wasn't the only quirky measure they took. Legend has it they once borrowed the official works of Euripides, Aeschylus, and Sophocles from Athens, on the condition they'd return them. They copied them quickly, returned the knockoffs, and kept the originals. Historians still argue whether Athens ever got wise to the switch, or if they just told themselves the newer version smelled fresher. The scribes of Alexandria were machines in human form. You watch one now, hunched over a wooden desk, his stylus dancing across papyrus, with a kind of frantic grace. He's copying a Hindu treatise on mathematics, occasionally muttering in Greek while chewing on a date pit. His neighbour is less focused. He's giggling at a comedic play from Syracuse involving a donkey, a stolen sandal, and something that probably doesn't translate well. You can almost feel the tension that lingers under the surface of all this brilliance. Alexandria isn't just a city, it's an experiment. One gust of wind, one jealous emperor, and this place could become a footnote. And there are plenty of threats on the horizon. Politics in Egypt, volatile, Rome, nosy. And even within the city there's resentment simmering among those who think the library is less a gift to humanity and more a tool for royal propaganda. Still, for now, it thrives. Some of the library's work is surprisingly practical. There's a quiet hum of innovation here. Engineers pore over scrolls describing irrigation systems and pneumatic machines. Medical students dissect texts on anatomy, literally and figuratively, and whisper about what the heart really does. No, Gregor, it's probably not just where love lives. Then there are the astrologers. You pass a room where a man with more rings than fingers is drawing concentric circles, mumbling about Mars and destiny. Beside him, a girl no older than 10 is calculating lunar eclipses using a pebble chart and the world's most patient expression. Her tutor beams. You pretend not to stare, but you're sure she just invented calculus, or at least some extremely niche horoscopes. But it's not all wide-eyed wonder. Not everyone appreciates the library's reach. The priests of older temples grumble that these scrolls devalue their oral traditions. Traditionalists mutter that Ptolemy's vision risks alienating the gods. And then there's that growing sense of danger from the wider world. Roman ambition, Seleucid envy, internal political drama that reads like an ancient soap opera with extra eyeliner. Even the architecture seems to know this place is too good to last. The columns are proud but weathered. The mosaic floors crackle softly underfoot, like they're whispering secrets to the dust. You pause beside a stone relief that shows a ship approaching Alexandria's harbour. A scroll clasped in one hand and a dagger in the other. Subtle. Still, the scholars press on. The philosophy students argue about virtue and the soul, while eating lunch that looks suspiciously like yesterday's dinner. A playwright storms through the corridor screaming about stolen ideas, again. And a new shipment of scrolls just arrived from Persia, which means the scribes will be up until dawn trying to translate them before the ink fades, or someone spills oil on the lot. Again. A quiet truth settles on you like a silk shawl. Knowledge is both powerful and painfully fragile. You watch a young girl tuck away a scroll of ancient myths beneath her tunic, her eyes bright with mischief. You smile. Maybe she's memorizing them. Maybe she'll be the reason something survives. Then, just as you start to doze off to the soothing rhythm of styluses scratching papyrus, a distant shout pierces the air. A dock worker, panting and red-faced, bursts into the courtyard. He's shouting something about soldiers, about a fire in the harbour. The scholars freeze. You freeze. Even the tortoise from earlier pauses mid-plod. It's nothing, someone says. Just a spark, it'll pass. You hope they're right. But deep down, you already feel it, the first flicker of the end. You stay rooted to the mosaic floor, the tortoise edging past your sandal like it knows something you don't. The scribe next to you has stopped mid-stroke, the tip of his stylus pressed too long against the papyrus, bleeding ink like a wound. Out in the courtyard, that dockworker's voice still echoes, raw with panic. You catch the words again. Fire. Harbour. Soldiers. And just like that, the day has changed. It's not the first time Alexandria has seen tension. The city's always been a bit of a powder keg. Ptolemies jockeying for power, scholars whispering rival theories, occasional temple brawls when someone dares suggest the Nile floods aren't the work of a particularly moody crocodile god. But this feels different. Even the pigeons on the library roof have gone quiet, as if waiting. A breeze slips through the archway, carrying the unmistakable scent of smoke. Not wood smoke, not the soft, pleasant kind from a baker's oven or a burnt offering in a temple. This is dry, biting, chemical. Like resin and parchment and regret, you step outside. The sun glints off the white limestone streets, dazzling your eyes for a moment. But there it is, off in the distance, a thread of dark smoke curling into the sky like a warning flag. Someone mutters, "It's the docks." Someone else corrects them. "It's the warehouse next to the docks." And someone older, voice steady but grim, says, "That warehouse backs onto the library annex." Your heart does a quiet little somersault. The annex. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Great Library wasn't a single building. It was more of a sprawling complex. The main structure stood close to the royal quarter, but there were satellite archives, rooms and storerooms scattered throughout the city, including one especially vulnerable spot near the harbour called the Daughter Library, housed in the Temple of Serapis. Theories swirl. Was it an accident? A dropped oil lamp? A careless torch? Or something more deliberate? Historians still argue whether the fire that touched the Library of Alexandria was set by Julius Caesar's troops during his campaign in 48 BCE, as they battled in the harbour and in an effort to destroy enemy ships, inadvertently set the coastline ablaze. But inadvertently doesn't quite capture the slow horror of watching your civilization's memory curl into ash, does it? You follow the nervous crowd threading through Alexandria's wide streets, past spice sellers hurriedly packing up their stalls, past philosophers looking uncharacteristically unsure of themselves, past children staring up at the sky, holding hands a little tighter. The smoke thickens. You cover your mouth with your sleeve. The fire's not at the main library, not yet, but the annex is lost. You catch a glimpse of it between alleyways, flames licking up the side of a marble wall, scrolls tumbling from open windows like wounded birds. A group of young scribes is desperately trying to save what they can, arms full of rolled parchment, faces streaked with soot. One of them drops a bundle, doesn't even stop, there's no time. The scent of burning ink is sharp and strange. The scrolls, once proud with knowledge, now disintegrate in the heat. Aristotle's commentaries, Egyptian astronomy, Babylonian star charts, Buddhist poetry carried overland by dusty traders. Gone. The air itself feels like it's full of ghosts, not people, but ideas. You feel the urge to help. You dart forward, grab a scroll half buried in the dirt. It's hot, but not yet flaming. You don't know what it says, something in Phoenician maybe? You stuff it into your cloak anyway. You don't know what else to do. Around you, the fire eats faster, the heat grows unbearable. But here's a quirky detail for your overloaded brain. According to one persistent rumour, some scrolls stored in the annex were wrapped in oiled silk to preserve them from humidity. Ironically, the same silk made them burn faster, like setting fire to a jar of incense wrapped in hope. The city watches helplessly. Soldiers form a barricade, not to fight the fire, mind you, but to stop people from looting. Always priorities. You squeeze past one guard who looks like he'd rather be doing anything else. You wonder if he knows he's witnessing the death of a library that held more knowledge than anywhere else in the ancient world. You wonder if he cares. And amid the panic, something quiet breaks your heart. An old man, kneeling in the street, whispering to a scrap of papyrus, eyes closed. A prayer, a poem, maybe a farewell. Maybe he wrote it. Maybe it's all he had left. By the time the fire's out, the annex is a husk. The roof has collapsed inward. Smoke curls out of every crack. A handful of scrolls lie in the gutter, ruined. A few scholars are crying openly. Some are eerily still, as if their minds haven't yet caught up to what's been lost. You wander back toward the main library building, clutching your half-scorched scroll. The city is quieter now, blanketed in ash. No one knows yet how much has been lost. The scribes will take inventory. The priests will perform cleansing rituals. The politicians will argue about blame. And the historians, well, they'll argue forever about whether it was Caesar's fire or something else entirely that marked the beginning of the end. But you were there. You saw it. You smelled the ink as it burned. You felt the heat of vanishing knowledge against your skin. And somewhere, deep inside, you know that what's gone might never be recovered. You return to the great courtyard of the main library, the fire behind you, casting long, trembling shadows down the stone corridors. Everything's quieter now, not peaceful, just stunned. Like the city itself is holding its breath, unsure if the worst is over or if the real catastrophe is only beginning. You pass under a painted archway, the ceiling tiled with deep blues and gold leaf stars, a map of the known heavens laid out like a dream. A few of the other scholars have gathered inside, dust-covered and silent. One young apprentice is rocking gently, scroll fragments clenched in both hands. You hear someone mutter, "This was only one wing." But nobody responds. You find your usual corner, a marble bench beneath a statue of Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom. His stone eyes seem a little more solemn tonight. The bench is cool, the air inside still dry and fragrant with old papyrus and the faintest hint of cedar oil. But it feels different now, like sitting in the eye of a storm that hasn't finished forming. The main library for now still stands, and what a marvel it is. This, right here, is the closest thing the ancient world had to the internet. The Great Library of Alexandria wasn't just a building, it was a global sponge for knowledge. Imagine you're a ship captain sailing into port. You unload your goods, declare your cargo, and then, surprise, you're also politely relieved of your books and scrolls. The library had a policy. Every text brought into Alexandria was copied by trained scribes, and the original was kept in the library while the duplicate was returned. This was the city's divine mandate, to collect everything. Historians still argue whether this policy was welcomed or quietly resented by traders and scholars alike. Was it a noble effort to preserve global knowledge or a slightly rude act of intellectual piracy? Either way, it worked. At its peak, the library may have housed hundreds of thousands of scrolls. Some estimates even claim nearly 500,000, though others say that's wishful thinking. You close your eyes and imagine the scrolls that once filled these walls, epic poems from Mesopotamia, surgical techniques from India, star charts from China, the lost plays of Euripides, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, annotated by Greek translators with coffee-stain-level commentary. There's even a rumour, probably exaggerated but charming nonetheless, that the original works of Homer were kept here, untouched by later edits. Maybe even signed, though. Let's be honest, ancient autographs were notoriously unreliable. You glance at the shelves. Rows upon rows of scrolls sit like soldiers at attention, each one delicate, precise, and absurdly flammable. One knocked torch, one open flame. No, let's not go there again. Still, you wonder about the minds that made all this possible. At the centre of this knowledge empire was the Mausian, a place of learning modelled after the Greek muses. It wasn't just a library, It was a full-blown research institute. Scholars lived here, ate here, probably argued endlessly over breakfast here. They had salaries paid by the state, free housing, and the freedom to study anything they wanted. From astronomy to zoology to philosophy to geometry to the effects of sleep deprivation on people who read too much before bed. Just saying. And here's a quirky fact to nudge your dreams. These scholars even dissected animals. Yes, occasionally humans too, to better understand anatomy. The library wasn't just about reading. It was about knowing, and knowing deeply. As you sit in that quiet corridor, you think of Eratosthenes. You probably passed his bust earlier, the one with the long nose and intense eyes that make it look like he's judging your every thought. He was one of the head librarians here, the man who, with just a stick, a well, and some very clever math, calculated the circumference of the Earth, and he was close, like scary close, within a few hundred miles, without GPS, without a compass, just shadows, geometry, and sheer nerve. Eratosthenes also invented the term geography. Imagine doing that over lunch and then casually going back to cataloguing scrolls by continent and genre. But despite all this brilliance, there's an uncomfortable truth tickling the back of your neck. You realise that knowledge, no matter how carefully copied, preserved, catalogued, can vanish. Just like that. Fire, water, war, neglect. Sometimes all it takes is a change in leadership, a shift in ideology, a new emperor who doesn't care for old scrolls full of dusty nonsense. You look at the other scholars in the hallway. Some are writing furiously, as if trying to save what's still intact. Others are just staring into space. You wonder how many of them are calculating not how to preserve the library, but how to escape with what matters most. And you? You're still clutching that damaged scroll from the annex. The edges are singed. You can't read the script. But it feels important, even if it turns out to be a very old grocery list. Outside, the sun is dipping below the rooftops. The fire is out, but the city is still buzzing. Rumours flying faster than any messenger pigeon. Some say the Romans set the fire. Others say it was locals, angry at the intellectual elite. A few even whisper that the gods themselves were displeased. Too many mortals chasing forbidden knowledge. That's always a classic. But inside the main library there's a strange calm. A moment suspended in time. You wonder if this is what it feels like to be inside a bubble just before it bursts. Thoth, above you, keeps watch. Silent. Knowing. The guardian of wisdom. And the silence stretches, heavy with what might still be lost. You wake, though you're not sure when you even drifted off, still leaning against the base of the statue of Thoth. The air's shifted, cooler now. Still smoky, but not from active flames. Just the scent of memory, clinging to stone and scroll like a stubborn ghost. Someone walks past you with a bundle of salvaged texts, their footsteps quick, anxious. Another follows, carrying soot-streaked clay jars, muttering about preserving what little remains. The annex may have burned, but the great library still breathes, for now. It reminds you of an old man with a lung infection, upright, still noble, but coughing smoke and blinking ash from its eyes. A crowd has gathered at the gates, not ordinary Alexandrians this time. These wear Roman armour, polished, red-plumed, the kind of soldiers who look like they've never had a real thought of their own, but they know how to follow orders. You squint toward the harbour. That's where it started, they say, where Julius Caesar made his stand. Mainstream historical fact. In 48 BCE, Julius Caesar found himself trapped in Alexandria during the civil war between Cleopatra and her brother, Ptolemy the Thegned. Seeking an edge, Caesar ordered the burning of Egyptian ships in the harbour to block enemy reinforcements. The fire spread, possibly to nearby warehouses and possibly to the library's scroll depots. It's one of those accidents of empire. A distraction. A footnote in Caesar's own journals. Oops, torched history, my bad. Historians still argue whether the main library itself was directly damaged in Caesar's fire, or whether it was only an outbuilding. Some say it was a partial loss. Others think it was the beginning of a slow death that would take centuries. Either way, you're standing in the ashes of something that will never fully return. You step outside and trace the path down toward the harbour. The streets bear new scars, shops broken, statues toppled. The water smells of oil and salt and charcoal, and there, standing in the shadow of a collapsed warehouse, is a pile of soaked, warped scrolls. Hundreds, maybe thousands. Tossed out, dried on wooden pallets, and now unsalvageable. Ink has bled like wine across parchment. The words are gone. One scribe nearby is writing from memory, trying to recapture a lost treatise on surgical instruments. You watch as he pauses, squints, then scribbles something else entirely. You can almost see the knowledge distorting, mutating, becoming a ghost of itself. And here's a strange but true detail. There were actually multiple disasters that likely contributed to the loss of the Library of Alexandria, not just one. Fires, invasions, philosophical purges, like a slow-motion multi-car pile-up across history. The destruction wasn't just about flames, it was about politics, pride, neglect, death by 1,000 forgettings. But right now, the biggest threat isn't neglect, it's power. The Roman soldiers now walk the corridors of the library. You watch one, clearly bored, poke at a bronze globe with his sword like it might squeal. Another frowns at a scroll and asks loudly why anyone would care how birds migrate. Someone chuckles. You do not. You find yourself in the atrium again, where a new group of scholars has gathered. Damage reports are being compiled. One man rattles off names of missing works. Another, younger, insists they can still rebuild. The mood oscillates between panic and denial, like a city trying to convince itself the ground didn't just shake. A tall woman with ink-stained fingers and the voice of a commander steps up onto a bench. She says they will copy what remains. They will reach out to Pergamon and Antioch, request duplicates of borrowed texts. They will not let this knowledge vanish. You believe her, sort of. But you also know something has changed. For the first time, the library feels mortal. You drift into the mathematics wing. It's quiet here, safe from the chaos outside. You run your fingers over a carved equation set into the wall. Something about spheres and volumes. Probably Archimedes. He never stayed here, but his ideas did. You imagine the scribes who read his work, gasped at his brilliance, then argued whether levers could really move the world. There's a story that floats into your mind, one that doesn't always make it into the mainstream textbooks. According to some fringe accounts, Alexandria kept secret scrolls. Not just rare or foreign ones, but forbidden ones. Books that challenged the gods, hinted at multiple universes, or described machines that mimicked life. Pure legend? Maybe. But as you pass a door half ajar, revealing a darkened room filled with sealed jars and strange instruments, you wonder. Historians still argue whether the loss of the library was truly catastrophic, or whether its impact has been exaggerated by romanticized accounts. After all, knowledge does migrate. It reappears elsewhere, absorbed, rephrased, repackaged. But that argument misses something deeper. It wasn't just about scrolls, it was about hope. Alexandria's library represented the belief that humanity could understand the world, that by collecting the best of us, we could build something eternal, and now that dream smells like ash. You pass back through the vestibule as night settles on the city. The torches have been extinguished for safety. Only oil lamps flicker in alcoves. Shadows move like old memories. You return to Thoth one more time. The statue has not moved. Its face is still calm, impassive, as though it's seen this all before. Maybe it has. You sit. Not because you're tired, but because you don't know what else to do. Your fingers still clutch the salvaged scroll. You haven't opened it yet. You do now. It's not a poem, not a treatise. It's a weather report. You laugh. Not because it's funny, but because in a way, it is. All this effort, all this pain, and what you've saved is a list of flood patterns and wind changes. And yet, as your eyes move across the faded ink, something settles in you. Even this has value. Even this mattered to someone. Even this is worth keeping. You stay seated, knees tucked against your chest, staring at that weather scroll like it's a lost gospel. It lists months and moons and an almost poetic description of an unusually rainy spring long past. The river rose without warning, it says in fluid, demotic script, and the fishermen spoke only in whispers. That line alone makes the whole thing feel like less of a meteorological memo and more like a gentle sigh across time. You tuck it away. The lamps flicker as a faint wind creeps through the colonnades, stirring old dust and maybe, just maybe, the souls of long-dead librarians. In the distance you hear the clatter of hooves, envoys arriving perhaps. News from Rome, from the desert, from whoever's brave or foolish enough to believe knowledge still has a place here. You step outside the library once again, heading north through the moonlit city. Alexandria's streets after dark are a different creature. Hushed, nervous, hollowed by fire and fatigue. You pass the shadows of collapsed awnings, ceramic shards glittering like stars in gutter puddles. A cat slinks past, tail high, completely indifferent to the collapse of 1,000 philosophies. You're not going home yet, you're headed to the Serapeum. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Serapeum was the daughter library of the Great Library, a temple dedicated to the Greco-Egyptian god Serapis, and filled with duplicate scrolls, overflow works, and possibly rare pieces that couldn't be publicly displayed in the main complex. Think of it like the library's off-site vault meets holy sanctuary meets intellectual panic room, but not tonight. Tonight, it stands empty, not burned, not yet. But the doors are barred, and soldiers guard the entrance. Not Romans this time, locals, nervous ones. You hear one whisper about a possible uprising. Another says the scrolls will be moved inland. A third shrugs and mutters, "What's left is cursed anyway." You don't get in, no one does. But you peer through the iron lattice gate and catch a glimpse of shelves in the moonlight. So many scrolls, so many stories, and so little time. You remember a curious rumour that some of the scrolls in the Serapeum weren't even legible, sealed, encoded, or written in forgotten alphabets. One tale claimed a set of scrolls there was written from the bottom up, meant to be read only underwater. Fringe theory, almost certainly. But Alexandria has a way of making even nonsense feel profound. Historians still argue whether the Serapeum actually rivaled the Great Library in importance or if it was merely its loyal sidekick. But what's undeniable is that it mattered. It was part of the system, a backup, an echo, a vault, and with the main library threatened, people now pin all hope on its preservation. You leave a note beneath the gate, a small scrap of parchment on which you've written only one word, "Remember." You know it won't survive the night, but you leave it anyway. As you make your way back through the city, you pass a public bath where two older philosophers are arguing about the nature of time. One insists time is a circle, the other says it's a river. You, meanwhile, are starting to suspect it's just a straight line leading into a locked temple full of smoke-damaged scrolls. You finally return to the Mausion, the heart of knowledge, still intact, barely. Inside, there's a new scene playing out. A royal advisor, draped in silks and nerves, is pacing the floor with a scroll of his own. He's speaking quickly, angrily. You catch phrases like Caesar's intentions, compensation, and public reassurance. It seems there's a new plan to downplay the fire, to suggest only a warehouse of lesser scrolls was affected. You almost laugh. What does lesser mean when you've lost records of rainfall from 400 years ago? Here's a quirky tidbit you overhear from a nearby scholar. Apparently some scribes had taken to hiding scrolls in jars, sealing them with wax, and burying them under loose stones in the gardens. Not for safekeeping. No, they believed certain texts were too dangerous to exist. They feared what might happen if the wrong ruler read the wrong story. You wonder now if those jars are still out there, quietly waiting beneath olive trees. And then, almost absurdly, a group of schoolchildren walks in. You blink. But yes, there they are, escorted by a weary tutor, cheeks flushed from the cold night air, each holding a blank wax tablet. Field trip? Some kind of civic ritual? You don't know. But the image is surreal. These tiny figures, barefoot, yawning, stepping into the dim library where knowledge is bleeding out, asking softly if they can still learn. The head scribe grants them entry. They sit, they listen, they copy, slowly, the letters of ancient Greek. Alpha, beta, gamma. You lean against a column, heart suddenly caught between despair and an odd little flutter of hope. Even now, with embers still glowing beneath the annex ruins, someone's teaching the next generation how to write. Maybe it's not over. Maybe it never really ends. You think of the scribe still awake, cataloguing what's left. The salvaged scrolls laid flat under linen, the battered crates bound for other cities. The minds, even in crisis, still desperate to understand. And you realise something important. Knowledge doesn't just live in scrolls. It lives in people, in conversations, in memories passed like torches across centuries. The fire took paper. But it didn't take everything. Not yet. You exhale, long and slow, your breath fogging in the cool air of the vestibule. Tomorrow will bring new threats, more debates, maybe more smoke. But for now, the library stands. damaged, shaken, mourning, but standing. And as the schoolchildren whisper their first alphabets beneath the gaze of crumbling statues, you press your palm against the cold marble wall and whisper something back. I remember. You don't sleep. How could you? You're still sitting on the stone floor of the Museon, back against a half-cracked column, watching as the dawn begins to leak in through the skylights like diluted gold. The city outside stirs like a beast rousing from uneasy dreams. Alexandria survived the night, but it feels thinner, like something vital has slipped away when no one was looking. Beside you, a stack of rescued scrolls waits to be sorted. Some are smoke-stained, some tied with silk cords, others scribbled in margins with personal notes, ink ghosts of readers long gone. You pick one up and realise it's a Babylonian translation of a Persian manual on eclipses. It smells like rain and dust and 1,000 secrets you'll never unlock. Outside, a rooster crows. No one pays it any mind. The city is too preoccupied with rumour. Historians still argue whether the fire that touched the library came from Julius Caesar's ships, or whether it was simply chaos seizing its opportunity. Some even claim the library had already been in decline by then, underfunded, underused, its glory days faded like old ink. But this morning, none of that matters. What matters is that something burned, and no one knows how much was lost. Someone nudges you gently. It's the librarian, the one with the cracked voice and ink-stained hands. He says there's going to be a procession. Not a funeral, not quite. More like a farewell to what was, and a call to preserve what remains. You nod and rise, brushing dust from your tunic, bones creaking like old shelves. You follow him out into the morning light. The procession begins near the harbour. Not grand. There are no trumpets, no garlands, just silence. Dozens of scholars, students, scribes and citizens walk slowly through the streets, each carrying a scroll. Some carry more than one. A few even carry broken tablets, splintered writing boards, or jars of ink held like relics. You join them. As you walk, you hear whispers. He said the fire was divine punishment. No, just wind and carelessness. I heard they saved the poetry section. Good. The rest was too dangerous anyway. There it is again. The gnawing idea that some knowledge is better off gone. That maybe, just maybe, this loss was a kind of cosmic pruning. Fringe thinkers had always feared the accumulation of too much knowledge. The idea that humans weren't meant to understand the mechanics of the heavens or the nature of the soul. You remember one eccentric who used to say, "Every scroll read shortens your time in paradise." Comforting, if a little dramatic. You walk past merchants opening shop, blinking at your quiet parade. A boy runs out with a jar of honey and offers it to one of the elderly scribes who laughs and takes it. Small gestures. That's how cities begin to heal. As you pass the main temple district, bells toll. A low sonorous rhythm that echoes through marble courtyards and temple facades. You glance toward the high steps of the Isis shrine where two priests bow in your direction. Even the gods, it seems, acknowledge the passing of Alexandria's intellect. Finally you arrive at the public amphitheatre. It's here the remaining scrolls will be counted, sorted, and, hopefully, copied. There's talk of dispatching copies to Athens, to Pergamon, maybe even to distant India if the roads are safe. You think about the miles those scrolls will travel, the hands they'll pass through, the languages they'll be reborn into, knowledge on foot, tired, but still walking. As the crowd settles, a speaker steps forward. A woman this time, draped in white linen and blue glass beads. She clears her throat, and the silence deepens. She speaks not of loss, but of memory. She reminds the crowd that the library was never meant to last forever, that it was a flame borrowed from the gods, and that even flames leave ash from which new fires can be kindled. She speaks of scholars who memorized entire texts, of translators working by moonlight, of letters carved into clay and sealed for centuries. The body may burn, she says, but the mind persists. You catch yourself nodding, not because it fixes anything, but because it's true. After the speech, the scrolls are laid out across the amphitheatre steps. Scholars kneel beside them, opening one after another, checking for damage, making quick notes on what can be salvaged. You sit near the edge, holding the eclipse scroll you picked up earlier. For a moment, you wonder what you should do with it. Keep it, donate it, eat it, just to feel something. Instead, you open it, Press your fingers to the soft fibres and begin to copy the first few lines onto a wax tablet. It's slow, it's imperfect, but it's how you start to rebuild. Later, someone brings bread. Another brings wine. The amphitheatre becomes a strange fusion of scriptorium and picnic. A few children giggle as they try writing their names backwards in Aramaic. One scholar is enthusiastically explaining the concept of logical paradoxes to a goat that wandered in from the street. The goat is politely disinterested. You overhear someone say that a fisherman claimed to see scrolls floating out to sea during the fire, that he gathered them in his net and tucked them into his boat, but that a Roman patrol took them. Whether it's true or not, you'll never know. But it's a good story, and sometimes good stories are all we have. The sun rises higher, casting long shadows across the scrolls like fingers reaching for something just out of reach. You finish copying the first page of the eclipse scroll. It's messy. Some of the characters are crooked, but it's yours, a piece of the library alive again, and you realise something beautiful in its simplicity. Even as empires fall, scrolls burn, and marble cracks, the act of learning, of remembering, of copying one letter at a time remains defiantly human. You stretch your fingers, now sticky with wax and smudged ink, and gaze across the sun-warmed amphitheatre. Scrolls flutter like birds caught in a hesitant breeze. Scholars mumble in half a dozen languages, and somewhere in the distance, a hawker shouts about figs being 2 for a denarius. You've just copied a fragment of a Babylonian eclipse table. No big deal. Just preserving humanity's knowledge one squint-inducing syllable at a time. The woman from the procession stands nearby, now seated under a faded awning. She's joined by others, scribes and librarians, most of whom still look slightly shell-shocked. One of them is attempting to catalogue what's left. A daunting task, considering no one actually agrees how many scrolls the Library of Alexandria held in the first place. Historians still argue whether the number reached 400,000, 700,000, or was merely a romantic exaggeration passed down like a bedtime story. Was it the greatest collection of knowledge ever assembled, or just a really big book club with good branding? You wouldn't know. But judging by the tiny mountain of documents now sprawled across the marble steps, there's still enough left to occupy a few lifetimes of study. Someone hands you a damp cloth to clean your ink-stained hands. Another offers olives wrapped in fig leaves. Alexandria has always known how to blend scholarship with snacks. The city doesn't pause for long, not even when tragedy knocks on its marble gates. You wander away from the amphitheatre for a moment, following a quiet alley shaded by date palms. It's still early, and the streets are filled with that gentle chaos that always arrives before midday heat. You pass a school where children recite multiplication tables and a perfume vendor grinding cinnamon bark by hand. The smell follows you like a ghost of comfort. You reach the outer wall of the Serapeum, the temple once connected to the library's annex, a place of learning and worship, a sanctuary for scrolls too controversial, too sacred, or just too weird for the main library. Here, more than one philosopher met their fate arguing with the wrong audience. But also here, strange knowledge was kept, on dream interpretation, anatomy, and whether or not the stars had personalities. You run your hand along the warm stone of the temple's wall. It's still blackened in places, a scar that won't quite wash away. As you step inside, the cool air feels like stepping into a tomb. Only this tomb smells of papyrus and frankincense. Some scrolls remain here too. The annex wasn't hit as badly, and a few scholars have barricaded the entrance with furniture to prevent looters. You nod as you pass them, lifting one hand like a casual conspiratorial hello. They look at you with the hollow-eyed exhaustion of people who've seen too much parchment for one lifetime. In the far corner you find something strange. A scroll resting atop a statue's foot, as if someone placed it there hastily during the chaos. You pick it up. It's heavier than the others and bound with a faded ribbon. When you unroll it, a diagram of a machine reveals itself. Not a catapult, not a loom. Something more elegant. Gears and water channels. A system of pulleys. You tilt your head. It looks like a device for mapping stars. Your eyes widen. Was this from the lost collection of Aristarchus? Or maybe even a model for an early astrolabe? The handwriting is ancient Greek, but there are annotations in Demotic, and a margin note in something suspiciously Phoenician. It's a multilingual party, and you're not on the guest list. Fringe scholars used to whisper that the Library of Alexandria didn't just collect texts. It collected ideas too dangerous for the outside world. machines that could predict earthquakes, alchemical formulas for endless life, a theory that ants spoke in poetry. You know, the usual, you laugh quietly. This machine is probably just for timing seasonal festivals. Still, your heart skips. You've uncovered something that feels precious, a fragment of curiosity made tangible. As you step back into the daylight, clutching the scroll like a rescued kitten, you nearly collide with a familiar face. The young copyist from earlier, the one who fell asleep on his ink pot. He blinks at you, then at the scroll and says, "That looks complicated." You nod solemnly. "Very." "Want help figuring it out?" You nod again. Back in the amphitheatre, the work has shifted into quiet concentration. Parchment is being sorted into categories: science, medicine, astronomy, religion, philosophy, forbidden love poems that make no sense anymore. You add your find to a stack labelled Techni Advanced. The copyist settles beside you, and together you begin sketching the diagrams onto fresh papyrus. You've become part of something you don't fully understand, a patchwork of strangers who now share a common goal: to rebuild something that maybe can't be rebuilt. Not entirely, but still, you try. Someone nearby chuckles and mutters, "At least the cookbook survived." You glance over to see a woman holding up a recipe for fish with cinnamon and fermented grape juice. She's shaking her head like it's the greatest horror ever committed to paper. You smile. Alexandria doesn't stay sombre for long. A gentle breeze lifts a corner of your papyrus. You place a pebble on it to keep it still. The sky above is painfully blue, the kind of blue that almost seems fake. You wonder how many scrolls were lost to fire, and how many simply vanished into basements, caravans, or the deep pockets of Roman generals. You'll never know, but you can't shake the feeling that the library isn't gone. Not entirely. It's alive in every ink stain on your hand, in every scribe's desperate scribble, in the scrolls that float into harbours and find new homes, in you sitting on stone steps, recreating a machine you don't quite understand. You look around and realise that maybe, just maybe, that's what libraries really are, not shelves. People. The hours slip by like honey sliding down the edge of a bowl, slow, sticky, inevitable. You shift your weight on the steps of the amphitheatre, stretching out one leg and trying not to let the stone imprint permanently on your thighs. Around you, the once frenzied courtyard now hums with soft meditative motion. The scribes are quieter. The chaos has congealed into something calmer. Organised confusion, maybe, or just a form of noble denial wrapped in papyrus. Somewhere behind you, someone coughs up a lungful of dust and curses the soot stuck to their sandals. The smoke from the fire still hangs faintly in the air. You taste it when you breathe too deeply: charred cedar, ink, and what might once have been leather bindings. Your fingertips brush another scroll, this one frayed at the edges and sticky with something unidentifiable. You don't ask questions. You unroll it gently and discover a treatise on medicine, complete with little diagrams of internal organs that look suspiciously like overcooked dumplings. One drawing shows a man with a suspiciously modern-looking prosthetic leg, fashioned from what seems to be bronze, wood, and sheer optimism. Historians still argue whether ancient prosthetics were ever functional, or if they were mostly ceremonial. But here in your hands is a whisper that maybe, just maybe, someone once walked through Alexandria with a metal leg that clicked like a metronome against the temple floor. A scribe sitting nearby peers over your shoulder, raises an eyebrow and says, "That one's gruesome." You nod, but practical. You both smile, then you both sneeze. Ancient dust is not gentle on the nose. Further down the steps, a group of scholars gathers around a scroll that seems to have some sort of recipe for a healing balm made from honey, fig paste, and crocodile dung. You pause. "Wait a second," you murmur. "Didn't we already run into that somewhere?" Callback confirmed. Crocodile dung sunscreen's weird cousin has arrived. Another scribe, who looks like he hasn't slept since Julius Caesar was in sandals, mutters, "You could smear that on a wound and summon the gods. Or just summon more flies." Still, the air of reverence remains. You all treat the scroll like it's sacred, even if it smells like a compost bin. Every piece of knowledge, no matter how bizarre, is treated with the same quiet awe. Maybe because no one knows what'll survive tomorrow, or the next fire. Someone stumbles into the courtyard dragging what looks like a charred crate full of wax tablets. Most of them are melted into abstract sculptures. Modern art, ancient edition. but a few still hold impressions, math problems, names, the odd love poem or insult. You hold one up and read aloud, "Aristos is a goat-brained fool." Well, at least someone had the guts to leave their thoughts behind. There's a brief round of laughter, and you feel something odd and comforting settle in your chest. Not all is lost. Not entirely. You glance across the plaza. One of the women from earlier, perhaps a priestess, perhaps just an unusually confident librarian, is whispering over a scroll as if it might answer her back. It's a treatise on astronomy, you think. The scroll bears illustrations of constellations that no longer match the night sky. Stars that shifted or were renamed. Some that disappeared entirely. A cosmic game of telephone that left Orion's belt missing a buckle. She's murmuring to the stars, or maybe just to herself. You don't interrupt. It's strange. How much of the work here is driven by instinct? There are no official orders. No one's in charge. And yet, people work. They preserve. They save what they can, not because someone told them to, but because it feels like the only thing to do. Like preserving a piece of themselves. You're handed a stack of scrolls next. Some are copies of Plato's dialogues. Others are philosophical debates over whether the soul has weight or whether vegetables feel pain. Fringe stuff. Your kind of stuff. As you settle into your corner of the stone stairway again, you notice the youngest of the scribes, barely old enough to grow a decent beard, tracing a scroll not with a pen but with his finger. He's not copying it, he's memorizing it, word for word. You ask him why. He shrugs, in case the copies don't make it. You stare at him, blinking slowly. That's dedication, or madness, or maybe, in Alexandria, those are the same thing. The hours melt away. You start to wonder what time it is, then you laugh, because time in Alexandria has always been more of a polite suggestion than a fixed concept. Sundials work best when the sun cooperates, and your stomach is a better clock than any celestial chart. As if summoned by your thoughts, someone passes around flatbread and olives. You chew absently, eyes still scanning the next scroll, this one about plants that only bloom during eclipses. Nonsense, someone says. Magic, someone else whispers. Both are probably right. Historians still argue whether ancient Alexandria was truly the birthplace of the scientific method, or whether it simply borrowed, improved, and catalogued ideas from everyone it conquered. But sitting here among these scrolls, you begin to realize it doesn't matter. What matters is that they kept going. They preserved knowledge in a world that rarely made room for it, and when fire came, they tried to save it again. You lean back, bones aching, papyrus in your lap, and watch as someone gently tucks a scroll into a clay jar, seals it, and buries it beneath the floor tiles. Just in case, they say. You nod. Just in case. The sun slants low now, casting Alexandria in golds and ochres, as if trying to soften the edges of the day with nostalgia. You sit there, hand pressed against the warm stone of the amphitheatre, watching shadows stretch like yawns. The city breathes around you, slower, heavier. Still tense, still wounded, but alive. A soft breeze carries the scent of the harbour, salt, fish, tar, and something fainter. Smoke. Always smoke. Even now, when the flames have long since died, the smell lingers. You wonder if it ever leaves. You walk back toward the Mausion, following the long colonnade that winds like a lazy river between temples and lecture halls. Columns line either side like silent sentinels, some still bearing chisel marks from repairs that never got finished. A few are cracked down the centre. Structural damage from the fire or just age. Hard to say. Everything here wears the disguise of timelessness, even when it's breaking down. The halls are mostly empty now. Scholars have taken the salvaged scrolls to safer places, some to temples, others to private homes, others rumoured to be smuggled onto ships leaving under cover of dusk. The scribe you met earlier, the one memorising scrolls like bedtime stories, is curled up in a corner, asleep at last, lips still moving faintly. A living archive. You pass a faded fresco near the eastern wing, its colours ghostly in the half-light. It shows scholars in debate, scrolls open, hands gesturing toward the heavens. One man is pointing to a model of the earth, a sphere. Not everyone believed it, not then. Historians still argue whether Eratosthenes truly calculated the earth's circumference with such eerie precision, using nothing but a stick, a well, and a long shadow at noon. You remember learning about that, how he measured the angle of the sun's rays in 2 different cities and did some quick geometry. All with tools so primitive that most modern toddlers could probably outmath him. And yet he came closer than anyone else until satellites came along. You stop and smile at the thought. Eratosthenes might have walked these very halls, might have leaned against this very wall, scribbling out rough numbers with a reed pen. You wonder what he'd make of GPS, of Google Maps, of people today using satellites to navigate to the nearest pizza place. Probably he'd weep, or laugh, or both. In a small alcove you find a half-burned tablet lying atop a heap of dust and feathers, left behind by someone in a hurry, or maybe on purpose. You kneel and blow gently, revealing a fragment of a map. Not of Alexandria, not even of Egypt. This one shows an imaginary land, full of oddly shaped continents, rivers that run uphill and mountains that seem to float. You recognize it, not from geography, from mythology. Someone drew a map of Plato's Atlantis. Fringe scholars once insisted copies of the Timaeus and Critias were housed in the Great Library, alongside lesser-known commentaries filled with diagrams like this one, entire treatises debating whether Atlantis was a metaphor or an actual place. Some even claim the coordinates were encoded in poetry lines, waiting to be unlocked. You trace the edge of the burned tablet with your thumb, you'll never know the truth. But again, maybe that's the point. Knowledge is half what we know and half what we imagine. A quiet rustle behind you. You turn to see a woman, older, with hair like carved ivory and robes that look like they haven't left a cedar chest in years. She holds a torch, but not one lit with fire. It's a symbolic gesture. The flame of knowledge passed from generation to generation. She doesn't speak, just looks at you, nods once, and walks past. The hem of her robe brushes your ankle like a whisper. You stand again and continue walking, this time toward the outer garden. The gardens of the Mausion were always peaceful. Even now they retain a sort of eerie calm. The fire never touched this place. Olive trees rustle in the wind, pomegranates hang heavy from their branches, and marble benches sit cracked but dignified under trailing vines. Someone's humming. You follow the sound and find an old man sitting cross-legged on a bench, carving letters into clay tablets. He sees you, grins with too many teeth, and says, "Paper burns, clay breaks." But the act of writing, oh, that's immortal. He lifts the tablet. It says nothing profound, just his name and the name of a woman he once loved. You nod and sit beside him for a moment. You watch the birds wheel overhead, hear the faint crackle of braziers being reignited inside the halls, feel the weight of history pressing in, not as a burden, but as a kind of gravity that keeps your feet grounded. And then, a thought floats across your mind like a leaf on a stream. Maybe the library was never meant to last forever. Maybe it was meant to burn, not as punishment, but as release. Because when things fall apart, they scatter. And when knowledge scatters, it travels. What matters is what survives the scatter. What matters is that someone, somewhere, remembers. The light fades gently now, slipping behind the rooftops of Alexandria like a cat ducking under a tablecloth. The shadows stretch long across the cobbled lanes, and the once-burning sky turns the colour of old parchment. Soft, yellowed, maybe a little singed at the edges. You found your way back to the heart of the city, where the grand courtyards and temples begin to hum again, not with fire or fear, but with that low, steady rhythm of normal life. You pass a group of street performers reenacting scenes from Homer with hand puppets. One of them trips and accidentally knocks over a vase, causing the Cyclops to squawk in protest. The crowd chuckles. Even tragedy, it seems, has its slapstick side. You cross the square and find yourself staring up once more at the facade of the Mausion. Its outer columns are soot-streaked now, and the pediment is missing a few statues, their heads cracked and lying in weeds. But still, it stands. Damaged, not destroyed. You step inside. The quiet hits you like a feather dropped in slow motion. The main hall is mostly empty. Most of the remaining scrolls have been relocated. What's left are fragments, half-burned ends, broken shelves, piles of ash swept into corners like memories no one wants to deal with yet. But even here, life stirs. At the far end of the hall, a woman sits weaving scroll wrappings into cord. Nearby, a young man catalogues what's left of the alphabetical section. He's stuck somewhere around lambda. You think about offering help, but then remember you once filed socks by zodiac sign, so maybe best not. You glance toward the central reading room, still intact, though the ceiling is cracked and one wall bears the scorch mark of a torch dropped in haste. You remember sitting there not long ago, copying fragments onto wax tablets, whispering lines aloud to memorize them, and wondering if the dust on your hands belonged to a philosopher or just a very old moth. There's still that sense in the air that Alexandria exists in two versions. One visible, made of columns and scrolls and scholars muttering about syllogisms, and another invisible, made of echoes, intentions, and things not quite lost. You step into the reading room, walking slowly, almost reverently. On one of the benches lies a scroll you haven't seen before. No title, no label. You open it and begin to read. It's unusual, not a treatise, not a poem, not even a list of inventories or banned books. It's a letter, addressed to no one in particular, maybe written by someone who saw the fire or foresaw it. The handwriting is rushed, slanted, like someone wrote it by torchlight during a storm. The letter talks about knowledge, what it gives, what it takes, how the library was built not just to preserve but to provoke, to make people think, and how dangerous that is. You read on. The writer speaks of the fear that always trails behind learning, that the more you know, the more uncertain the world becomes, and yet, they write, uncertainty is the only true sign of progress. Certainty is the luxury of those who haven't read enough. You blink, then chuckle. The scroll ends mid-sentence. No signature, no date. Just a long, ragged line where the ink bled out or the writer was interrupted. It leaves you hanging, like a song missing its final note. You set it down gently, and for a moment, you're still. It strikes you. How odd this all is. This strange intimacy with voices long dead, people who never imagined you, sitting here, breathing the same air, holding their words. Alexandria gave them that gift, and now you carry it forward. You rise and walk the perimeter of the room, running your fingers along shelves, stone, ash. You pass a wall where names are etched into plaster. Some you recognize, Herophilos, Hipparchus, Xenodotus. Others are anonymous, scratched by uncertain hands. Maybe students, maybe copyists, maybe someone like you. The breeze catches through the cracked windows. It rustles the remaining scrolls softly, like paper sighing in its sleep. Down the corridor, someone hums a lullaby. You can't place the melody. It might be Greek, might be Egyptian, might be made up on the spot, but it fits. It wraps the moment like warm cloth. You exit through the back, where a small garden blooms stubbornly beneath a crumbled aqueduct. There's a bench here, half swallowed by vines, but functional. You sit and breathe. Across the city, torches are being lit. Candles flicker in windows. Someone plays a flute, poorly but enthusiastically. A child chases a cat. A market stall stays open just long enough to sell one last plum. You think about how Alexandria once aimed to gather all the knowledge of the world in one place, and how that was probably never possible, and how they tried anyway. That, you think, is what mattered. You stay on that vine-draped bench a little longer than planned. The stone is warm from the sun that's already dipped below the horizon, and the air smells faintly of crushed herbs and distant incense. You can hear voices drifting from the city, vendors closing shop, a spirited debate over wine prices, a very enthusiastic argument about Aristotle's confusing take on metaphysics. You could sit here forever, really, letting the day fade out like an old lullaby. But something tugs at you. Curiosity. A kind of whisper that says, not everything burned. You stand and wander back through narrow streets, slipping past closed doors and cats who stare at you like you've interrupted their plotting. You're heading toward the harbour, not the great port with its lumbering trade ships, but the quieter eastern docks, where smaller boats rest and the waters lap against stone like a sleepy heartbeat. This part of Alexandria was once the intellectual spillover of the library itself, where satellite buildings, annexes and scribes' quarters stretched toward the sea. You'd heard the stories, even copied some of the plans. They said the backup copies of rarer works had been stashed here. Extra scrolls, secondary commentaries, diagrams too odd or too controversial for the main halls. And tonight, just maybe, you'll find something left behind. The streets narrow here. Old marble stairs lead downward toward a stone arch half swallowed by vines. You duck through it, stepping into what looks like a courtyard crossed with a tunnel. Dim lanterns flicker on hooks. There's a locked door to your left with a rusted plaque that says Marine Zoology, Volume 2. You're tempted. But something else catches your eye. A cellar door, slightly ajar. Well, when life gives you mysterious basements, you descend. Your sandals scuff gently down the steps. The air is cool, damp, and it smells faintly of salt and old paper, like someone tried to pickle history in seawater. You reach the bottom and pause. There's a room ahead. Round. Low ceiling. Scroll cubbies carved into the walls, most of them empty. A large desk in the centre, its legs cracked but still holding a pile of scrolls and clay tablets, bundled like someone meant to come back for them, and they never did. You step forward and unroll the first scroll. It's strange. Not in content, it's a treatise on wind currents and ocean tides, but in format. It's annotated in 2 languages, Greek and something you can't immediately place. You squint. The letters are curved, flowing, possibly Phoenician, maybe even something older. You turn to another scroll. This one describes sea routes south of Egypt, along the Red Sea, and down to a place called Apone. There's a list of rare goods: cinnamon, tortoise shell, and something translated awkwardly as spiced moon dust. Someone underlined it 3 times, probably as confused as you are. Next scroll. A description of an ancient harbour city that no longer exists. It talks about domed roofs, canals, a lighthouse shaped like a burning fruit. You pause. That's either a translation error or history's most avant-garde architecture. You glance up. The room feels still, but not abandoned, as if ideas left behind still hum faintly in the air. There's a shelf near the back, tucked into a recess, half hidden behind a fallen tapestry. You lift the cloth and reveal a set of stone tablets. Flat, heavy, cracked at the corners. Carved on them are maps, not of the known world, but of a world imagined, or maybe remembered. One tablet shows a vast land to the west, far beyond the Pillars of Hercules, too detailed to be mere fantasy, too strange to match anything you've seen. Another shows an inland sea surrounded by pyramids, not in Egypt, but somewhere far to the east. The annotations are cautious, some marked with, or the Greek equivalent of, maybe. Historians still argue whether these were myths, visions, or deeply confused geography. Some say Alexandria was a repository not just of fact, but of speculation, a place where the known and the dreamed blurred together. You run your hand along one of the maps. The grooves are still sharp. Someone carved this with care, with belief. What if the library didn't just preserve knowledge? It stored questions no one was ready to answer. You sit at the cracked desk, suddenly overwhelmed by it all. The fire, the fear, the voices now silent. And yet, this room, hidden and forgotten, feels more alive than half the city. You smile tiredly. Because here's the thing no one tells you about history. It's not just about what we know. It's about what we wonder. You imagine the scribe who last sat here. Maybe they snuck in when the main library closed, lit a lantern, and carved mysteries into stone while the world outside argued over power, land, and which sandal style was in that season. You imagine they believed that someday someone would find this. And here you are. You lean back and breathe. The cellar is quiet, but it's the kind of quiet that vibrates, like a held breath, like the pause before a story continues. Outside, the sea murmurs to itself. The city creaks with wind. Somewhere, a lantern is being lit, and someone's whispering facts into their child's sleepy ear. And beneath it all, the knowledge waits. Not lost, just hidden. You climb the steps back out of the hidden cellar slowly, as if waking from a dream that you're reluctant to leave. Your fingers still smell faintly of mouldy parchment, wax, and oddly, spiced moon dust. Whatever that is, you may never know. But the idea of it lingers, pleasantly strange. The stars are out now. Alexandria by starlight feels like an entirely different city. Gone are the bustling market cries, the sandals slapping stone, the whisper of scrolls being unfurled. Now, everything is hushed, bathed in silver and shadow. You look up, and for a moment forget all the ruins and ashes. The night sky here stretches wide and wild, salted with constellations that ancient scholars once believed were God's mid-argument. You walk along the waterfront where the lighthouse of Pharos gleams in the distance. Its beacon swings slowly over the bay like a giant unblinking eye, watching, maybe even judging. You remember hearing that it stood nearly 400 feet tall, one of the 7 wonders of the world. Some say it was the tallest structure ever built by human hands, until modern skyscrapers took over the bragging rights. Historians still argue whether the mirror atop it could truly focus sunlight to set enemy ships ablaze, or whether that was just a poetic flourish from someone with too much wine and too little naval experience. You sit near the docks for a while, letting the salty breeze comb through your hair. The waves lap against the stone in lazy, repetitive rhythms. It's hypnotic. You imagine ancient astronomers standing right where you are now, pointing to stars and scribbling calculations onto wax tablets, convinced they were unlocking the universe 1 degree at a time. Eventually, your feet carry you toward a neighbourhood known more for its wine and rumour than for scholarly pursuits. But tonight, even here, talk of the fire weaves through taverns like smoke. Patrons pass around second-hand tales of what was lost and what was saved. Everyone seems to know someone who smuggled out a scroll or memorised a passage or saw a vision in the flames. You eavesdrop gently from a shadowed corner, sipping watered wine that tastes vaguely of raisin and regret. One man swears he saw a glowing figure in the library just before the blaze. Another claims the fire was started not by soldiers or rebels, but by librarians themselves, desperate to keep certain knowledge from falling into the wrong hands. A third tells of a secret room beneath the library where scrolls were copied not in ink, but etched in light onto crystal slabs. You raise an eyebrow. That one's new. But in a city like this, with its tangle of history, myth and burnt corners, who's to say where truth ends and storytelling begins? You leave before anyone notices you. The streets are quieter now, and the air cools enough to make you wrap your arms around yourself. Somewhere a dog barks once. Somewhere else, a door creaks open and slams shut again. Back in the more scholarly quarter, you spot someone sitting in the ruins of what used to be a lecture garden. She's muttering to herself, surrounded by scroll fragments and broken instruments, astrolabes, sundials, a water clock that's missing more than half its parts. You approach, curious. She looks up. Trying to fix time, she says, as if it's the most natural thing in the world. It's off balance now. You blink. Because of the fire. Because of the loss, she replies, waving her hand at the fragments like a magician refusing to explain a trick. We measured the stars, the tides, the soul itself. And now, we measure absence. You sit beside her. She doesn't protest. Together you stare at the broken water clock. It's an elegant thing, even in ruin. Bronze gears, a cracked basin, delicate inscriptions around the rim. Maybe once, it told time so accurately that scholars would set their hearts by it. Now it's just art, but beautiful nonetheless. She hands you a gear, you turn it over in your palm. It feels heavier than it should, like it carries memory in its grooves. She adds, "There's a theory that the universe forgets nothing. That information once created is never lost, not even in fire. It just transforms." You nod slowly. That idea, you think, could keep a city alive. The stars above you continue their ancient crawl across the sky, unaware of what's been lost or salvaged beneath them. You wonder if they care. Probably not, but that's okay. You do. From the steps behind you, a voice calls out. It's one of the copyists. He waves a scroll in the air and shouts, "We found another one!" You both smile and she rises, brushing dust from her robes like a woman shaking off the centuries. "Time for hope," she says. You follow her back toward the heart of the ruins. You return through winding alleys to what's left of the inner complex. The scroll halls and lecture rooms now reduced to a quiet sprawl of half-standing walls, scattered debris and flickering torchlight. The sky above has shifted into that deep indigo phase of night, when the stars look like pinholes poked through velvet, and the moon hangs low and lazy, like it's watching everything with detached curiosity. The copyist who called out earlier is kneeling in the dirt beside a broken stone step, brushing soot off a bundle that was wedged in a crack between 2 paving tiles. A miracle, honestly. You don't know how many scrolls were destroyed. Thousands, probably more. But every time someone uncovers even one, it feels like pulling a constellation back from oblivion. You crouch beside him. "What is it?" He unties the cord reverently, like it's some ancient relic that might curse him or bless him depending on his mood. Inside, a scroll so brittle it flakes when you breathe too close. But the ink is still legible. Barely. Music theory, he whispers, surprised. From Ptolemy? Your eyebrows lift, as in the Ptolemy, the polymath, the one who mapped the stars, dabbled in optics, and occasionally had some very questionable takes on planetary motion. He points to a margin where someone, perhaps centuries ago, scribbled a note in Greek. This scale only works in dreams. You both laugh softly, and now you really want to hear what that sounds like. Historians still argue whether Ptolemy's musical writings were scientific in purpose, or more like philosophical musings dressed up in ratios and diagrams. But the idea that the cosmos had a music, a literal harmony of the spheres, wasn't just metaphor. It was a belief, a foundation, a bedtime story for mathematicians with insomnia. The scroll is passed reverently to one of the preservationists, who murmurs thanks and vanishes with it into a makeshift shelter where scrolls are being dried, aired, and occasionally sung to, just in case that helps. You sit on the stone step watching the preservationist's work. There's an energy here now, not frantic like before, but focused, optimistic. Like everyone has decided, quietly and collectively, that what matters now is not what's gone, but what can still be saved. A girl, maybe 10 or 11, passes by carrying a stack of water-stained tablets taller than her own head. She drops one. You bend to pick it up and catch the title, Dreams as Warnings from the Gods. It's equal parts medicine, mysticism, and what appears to be a dream diary involving talking goats and bread that screams when sliced. You don't question it. Honestly, that feels pretty normal right now. You glance to your right, where another group is trying to piece together a massive celestial chart, using what looks like a combination of surviving parchment, verbal recollection, and sheer audacity. Half the constellations are labelled Maybe This, or Ask Theo. You've never met Theo, but he seems to be the authority on at least 5-star clusters. You walk past them and into one of the lecture gardens. Its pergolas are mostly collapsed, vines spilling in from every angle, but someone's lit lanterns along the wall and arranged cushions in the grass. You sit, stretching your legs, and realise how quiet it is now. The city, the fire, the shouting, all faded into the background. All that remains is the sound of quills scratching, quiet chatter, and the wind nudging the leaves around like it's helping organise. A teacher, one of the elder ones with ink-stained sleeves and an expression like he's smelled too many bad scrolls in his lifetime, who recites from memory a passage about the seasons. He stumbles on a line, frowns, and then improvises something about summer being the Earth's way of yawning. The students don't question it. They just nod, sleepily, like that was profound. And maybe it was. You close your eyes for a moment. When you open them again, the stars seem brighter. Or maybe your eyes have just adjusted. You think about how many voices must have passed through this place. How many thinkers, teachers, scribes, wanderers, eccentrics. Alexandria drew the curious the way fire draws moths, and sometimes with similar consequences. But still they came. Still you're here. You remember a line from one of the scrolls. The mind is a lantern, and doubt is its oil. You're not sure if that was meant as encouragement or a veiled insult, but it fits either way. You sit a while longer in the garden, breathing in night air, letting your brain unwind like the thread of a papyrus roll. Above you the constellations continue their ancient shuffle, and below, in the quiet ruins of what once aspired to contain all human knowledge, someone carefully recites a forgotten theorem about the angles of a perfect triangle, right before accidentally dropping the scroll into their soup. You can't help but laugh. Because this is Alexandria. Because somehow, despite everything, the learning goes on. You leave the lecture garden sometime after midnight, though time feels meaningless here. The stars haven't moved much, but everything else has. The scrolls are being shifted, sorted, catalogued. The ruins now buzz with a strange kind of stillness, like the quiet just before dawn, or the hush of a library that's not sure it still exists. You find yourself walking alongside one of the old walls of the Museion. It's cracked and blackened in places, but parts of the mural still cling to the stone. A frieze of philosophers and gods frozen mid-debate, arms raised in eternal, impassioned contradiction. Their faces are chipped, but their gestures remain. It's like watching an argument that's been paused mid-sentence for 2,000 years. You round a corner and enter what used to be the Hall of Devices. You've heard whispers about this place, a room devoted to technology, ancient machines, automata, hydraulic clocks, trick doors, and maybe even a steam-powered bird that could flap its wings and scare visitors half to death. Most of it was gone long before the fire, repurposed, looted, or simply lost to time. But tonight someone has brought back fragments. Scholars and craftsmen kneel over bits of copper and wood, piecing together gears with tweezers, like watchmakers resurrecting a heartbeat. You squat beside a young woman working on what looks like a miniature catapult designed to launch figs. She catches your glance and grins. "It's a mechanical theatre," she says. "Used to act out stories. This one was for comedies." You raise an eyebrow. "Exploding fruit?" "Always gets a laugh," she deadpans. She hands you a tiny crankshaft, and for a moment you help her fit it into place. It clicks with a satisfying little K-chunk, like history approving of your contribution. Elsewhere in the room, someone's reassembling a water organ, an instrument that uses hydraulics to force air through pipes. It wheezes as they test it, releasing a ghostly note that sounds somewhere between a whale sigh and a confused trumpet. "Still tuning," they say. You stroll deeper into the hall, past tables covered in blueprints, some genuine, some imaginative recreations, some probably drawn by very enthusiastic liars. One diagram shows a cart that moves without horses, powered by weights. Another sketches a crane operated by human treadmill. Another still shows what looks like a vending machine. You lean in. It dispenses holy water. Of course it does. Historians still argue whether the so-called automated temple doors were real or just part of religious spectacle. But one thing's clear. People back then were obsessed with making the world dance at the push of a button. You reach a corner table where an old man is cradling a cracked model of the Antikythera mechanism, a device so complex it looks like it fell out of a steampunk convention. He turns the gears slowly, murmuring to himself. Tracks the movements of the heavens, he explains without looking up. Lunar cycles, solar years, eclipses. "Does it still work?" He pauses. "In theory." You leave him to it and wander back toward the open doorway. The night breeze has shifted slightly, cooler now, with the faint promise of dawn somewhere over the sea. You catch a glimpse of the lighthouse again, its beacon lazily swinging like a sleepy metronome. Everything about Alexandria tonight feels like a lullaby composed in ruins. You sit on a bench near the exit of the Hall of Devices, letting your thoughts drift. The juxtaposition is strange, this burned-out shell of a building, filled with machines built to imitate life. Maybe that's the thread running through it all. The obsession with preservation, not just of knowledge, but of motion, of sound, of intention. You remember an old joke one of the philosophers made once, years ago. We keep building machines to mimic gods, and all they do is break down like mortals. You chuckled back then. You chuckle again now. Across the courtyard, someone strikes a tuning fork and listens to it ring. Another person claps, once, sharply. The echo bounces off the stone walls, then disappears into the night. A test, maybe, or just curiosity. Either way, it's perfect. You close your eyes and picture what this place might have been like before the fire, buzzing with conversation, invention, ink-stained fingers, wild theories, the sharp scent of bronze polish and parchment, scrolls arriving from India, Carthage, Rome, passed from hand to hand like secrets, and now the aftermath. But not the end. Because here's the thing, fire may erase pages but not ideas. Machines may rust, but not the drive to build them. And people may forget for a while. But they always circle back when the night grows quiet enough to hear the whisper of old ambitions. You rise from the bench and make your way back toward the central court, your footsteps echoing gently behind you. Somewhere someone starts to sing again, softly, a hymn maybe, or just a wordless melody stitched together from memory. The notes float up into the night air, brushing against the walls, slipping between the cracks, settling into the stone like pollen. You listen, then smile, still tuning. The courtyard has grown quieter now, and so have you. Something about wandering these half-ruined halls under starlight, surrounded by half-rebuilt machines and half-remembered names, has slowed your pulse. You find your way toward what once might have been the library's scriptorium, a place where scribes copied and recopied text by hand, sometimes for years, just to preserve a single work. Imagine doing that now with, let's say, your inbox. You step through a low stone arch and into the hushed room. Shelves long since burned down have been rebuilt with temporary scaffolding. Clay tablets lie side by side with scrolls and parchment scraps, all stacked with meticulous care. And seated on the floor, cross-legged, is a young scribe, well, a reenactor maybe, inking a stylus across a papyrus sheet. You sit nearby, not wanting to disturb them. The scratching sound of the pen is rhythmic, like rain against a window. You're suddenly aware of your breathing, of your spine gently realigning after so much walking, of the way your fingertips have started to tingle slightly. Too many scrolls, too many ghosts. The scribe speaks without looking up. You know, they say one of the first things lost in the fire was the catalogue. You blink. The catalogue? They nod. Over 100 scrolls just listing what the library had. Titles, authors, origins, topics. So not only was the library destroyed, but the map to what it held was burned too. That's like losing not just your entire music library, but also the playlist names. All the vibes, gone. You look around. It's a quiet chaos, tables scattered with unlabelled fragments, pieces of ancient stories that no longer have homes. One reads like a commentary on Aristotle. Another might be a shopping list for ceremonial figs. Someone in the corner is trying to decipher a passage using 3 different dialects, none of which match. Historians still argue whether the catalogue was truly as extensive as legend suggests. Some believe it was exaggerated over time, like the world's most intellectual game of telephone. Others think the catalogue was real, but constantly evolving, rewritten as new works arrived by ship or by scholar's hand. You imagine the librarians of old managing that kind of mess. The Dewey Decimal System didn't exist yet. Just brains, chalk, and probably a few heated debates. One tale suggests that scrolls were sorted by subject and stored in pigeonholes along the walls. A little wooden tag might be hung to indicate its contents. Others say some sections were sorted by author, region, or even how dangerous the ideas were. You wonder if there was a shelf labelled "Warning, may cause existential crisis." You run your fingers over one of the scrolls, a replica but aged beautifully. It contains part of a play, written in fading Greek. It mentions a king, a lost ring, and a dog that speaks in riddles. You smile. Even back then, people loved a good mystery. To your left, a group has gathered around a wax tablet trying to recreate a poem from scratched-out lines. One of them insists it's romantic. Another swears it's political satire. A third claims it's a recipe for spiced wine. They all might be right. The joy and frustration of history is that interpretation is inevitable. The ink may be old, but the curiosity is fresh every time someone new leans in to read. There's a wall covered in fragments labelled untranslated, hundreds of them. You stare at a few, symbols that don't quite line up with any known language. Some scholars argue these could be early forms of writing lost to time. Others think they might just be scribbles from bored apprentices. Either way, someone once thought they were worth saving, and that's the thread again, isn't it? The instinct to preserve. Even now, with most of the library turned to ash and memory, people still crouch here in the ruins, carefully copying, translating, whispering. The flames didn't stop that. If anything, they made it burn brighter. A man walks past with a fresh bundle of scrolls, replicas, salvaged texts, and a few hopeful forgeries. He pauses, looks round, then shrugs. "We don't know what we lost," he says. "But maybe we don't have to." You tilt your head. "Maybe," he continues, "what matters isn't what was here, but what it inspired." It's a comforting thought, that even though Alexandria's shelves collapsed, its spirit didn't. The drive to collect, question, compare, and share, that still lives. You see it in every student poring over a fragment, in every artist sketching the ruined architecture, in every quiet figure who walks these halls not to mourn, but to remember. You get up slowly, stretch your legs, and follow a small lantern light down another corridor. This wing feels older, like it hasn't been touched since the last real librarian locked the doors and hoped for the best. You reach a small chamber, empty except for a single wooden chair. You sit. The silence here is different, not hollow, but deep, as if the walls themselves are still listening. You close your eyes for a moment, and for a breathless second you imagine it, what it was like before, when every room was alive with voices, when scribes inked out translations, when debates echoed into the atrium, when scholars sat by oil lamps, whispering verses and comparing star charts, when the smell of wet papyrus mingled with sea breeze and ambition. It's not just a building you're remembering, it's a world, a promise, a dream that burned and somehow still survived. You open your eyes again, and the room is just a room, quiet, still, waiting, and so are you. You rise from the wooden chair like a shadow peeling away from the past. The air in the old chamber is thick, not with smoke or dust, but with memory. Not just your own, but the kind you feel pressed into the stone, waiting like faint breath behind your ear. You give the room one last glance before stepping out, back into Alexandria's ruins, back into the night that hasn't stopped watching. Outside, a breeze stirs the remains of old parchments. The moon is now higher, round and pale, watching over the shattered bones of one of humanity's greatest dreams. You walk slowly, not quite ready to leave this place behind, though you know the city will soon slip into sleep again, its secrets curling up beside it like an old cat. You follow a row of columns, some upright, others toppled like drunks in slow motion, until you find a covered alcove where a few scholars have set up what looks like a map room. Long parchment rolls stretch across low tables, weighed down by stones and sea glass. One scroll unfurls like a lazy snake, covered in criss-crossing lines and notes scribbled in multiple hands. It's a world map, or at least what the Alexandrians thought the world looked like. Spoiler alert, it's not great. The proportions are ambitious. Greece is the size of a small continent. India sort of melts into the ocean. Africa, it just trails off into question marks and what looks suspiciously like a drawing of a camel wearing a crown. And yet, somehow, you love it. Because this isn't a map of the world, it's a map of the known, of what they dared to imagine before anyone invented Google Earth. You trace one of the lines with your finger. It runs eastward, across desert, mountain, river, and scribbled annotations like "Here be silk" or "People here eat fish that fly." Historians still argue whether these maps were based on first-hand experience, myth, or that one sailor who always exaggerated everything after 2 drinks. Probably all 3. A young cartographer looks up from her copying and gives you a half-smile. "We're trying to reconstruct Eratosthenes' map," she says. "Ah, Eratosthenes. The man who, using only shadows, sticks, and geometry, estimated the circumference of the Earth to within a few hundred miles. 2,000 years ago. You still can't fold a fitted sheet properly, but this guy measured a planet with a ruler and a dream." She continues, "We found fragments of a letter he wrote, explaining how the sun casts different shadows in Scene and Alexandria. That's how he guessed the Earth's curve." You nod. "And then what?" She shrugs. "Then someone set fire to the library." "Right. That." But instead of bitterness, there's humour in her voice. You get the sense that everyone here, everyone still clinging to the ghost of Alexandria, isn't mourning anymore. They're rebuilding, redreaming. You stroll past her table and into a narrow corridor where 2 elderly men are having what appears to be a passionate disagreement over longitude. One of them slaps a clay disc for emphasis. No, it's sundials, not sound dials. He didn't hear the sun." The other scowls. "You weren't there." You smile and slip past them. Honestly, it's comforting to know that arguments over measurement have been around forever, and probably always will be. At the far end of the hall is a mosaic, shattered, but still beautiful. It shows a woman cloaked in blue, holding a scroll in one hand and a torch in the other. Beneath her, in fading Greek, are the words, "To know the stars, you must first light the fire within." You pause. It's ironic considering how fire ended this place. But also, maybe not, because the torch she holds isn't destruction, it's illumination, it's defiance. Maybe the library wasn't just a place of storage. Maybe it was rebellion, a refusal to forget, a statement. We are more than conquest and kings. We are ideas. And ideas, as it turns out, don't burn so easily. You sit again, on a broken column this time, and watch a group of young students organising recovered scroll fragments. They hum softly as they work. One of them has tied a strip of papyrus around their head like a crown. Another keeps mispronouncing Plato and calling him Platost. No one corrects them. No one needs to. Because the point isn't perfection. It's persistence. It's the act of remembering, even when the page is missing, of speaking the words aloud, even if they're fragments, of piecing together a world one corner at a time. You breathe out slowly. It smells like ink, like ash, like seawater, like lavender, like pages turning inside the mind. You sit there for a long time, letting it all settle, letting it all stay. You sit still, feeling the weight of everything this place held and everything it lost. The Library of Alexandria isn't here anymore. Not really, but it's also not gone. You can feel it in the way people still whisper around the ruins as if afraid to wake the ghosts. You can sense it in the scribbled sketches left by the cartographers, the half-rebuilt formulas scrawled across clay tiles, the quiet determination in the eyes of people you've never met, yet somehow recognise. It's funny how something so silent can still be so loud. You rise again and follow the edge of the water, where the ancient coastline once held ships that carried scrolls from every known port in the world. You imagine what it must have looked like. Harbour bustling with languages, scrolls packed in reed baskets, each one arriving like a message in a bottle from some far-flung corner of civilization. And you? You're the ghost now, haunting this moment backwards. In the moonlight, you spot a partially submerged stone slab near the edge of the shore. You wade in. The water is cool, ankle-deep, stirring with memories. You brush away some seaweed and read what's barely still visible. To preserve knowledge is to preserve ourselves. It's not famous. It's not even credited. But something about it feels more powerful than any of the scrolls that went up in flame. Because this was the purpose. This was what drove them. What drove us. Not just the facts, but the why behind keeping them. Historians still argue whether it was Caesar's siege that started the first fire, or later invaders who finished the job. Some say the Great Blaze was a myth, maybe even propaganda, a convenient symbol for something more abstract, the slow, painful erosion of attention. 1,000 little losses over centuries, bureaucracy, neglect, repurposing scrolls as packaging or cooking fuel. Maybe fire was just the final excuse. Others think it was more insidious, an act of fear. Knowledge is dangerous after all. You know too much. You ask the wrong questions. You start connecting dots that someone powerful didn't want connected. Suddenly the room gets a little too hot, doesn't it? You walk inland now, past the bones of a temple, where philosophers used to debate the shape of the soul. One step echoes, then another, like footsteps in a mind remembering itself. You pass an amphitheatre, or what's left of one, half a circle of stone teeth, gnawed by time. Inside, someone has left a bundle of scroll fragments tied with a red thread. You unroll one. It's written in Greek, the ink faded like fog. You make out only a few words. Truth waits, in silence. It feels right. You tuck the scroll back into its resting place and continue your wandering. Alexandria stretches before you like a thought half dreamed. Some parts are broken beyond recognition. Others still shimmer with ghost light, places where you feel the presence of something old and stubborn and beautiful. You pause outside a circular room. The walls are marked with sun patterns. This, they say, was where the earliest attempts at cataloguing star charts began. Long before telescopes. Before even the idea of space, as we understand it. They used math, sure, but also mythology. Horoscopes, symbols. The heavens weren't just physics to them, they were personalities, moods, warnings. There's a faded mural here. A bull, a scorpion, a pair of twins, all dancing in a cosmic spiral. The zodiac, born not from entertainment magazines, but from a desperate human longing to understand the uncontrollable, to name the unknowable. You lie on the cold stone floor for a moment, arms stretched wide like you're trying to hold the whole sky. The roof above has long collapsed, so now you're staring at stars. Modern ones, still ancient, still burning, still unreachable. The wind whistles through the cracks in the columns like breath caught between memories. You close your eyes and let it take you. You're standing in the Serapeum now, the daughter library to the Great Library. They say it survived a little longer. Some scrolls may have found refuge here. You imagine someone, a scribe, a librarian, smuggling armfuls of parchment across the city in the dead of night, risking everything for words, for knowledge. That's not just noble, it's kind of badass. Inside, statues of forgotten gods stand crookedly. One of them, Serapis, stares ahead with eyes that seem to say, "You don't belong here." And maybe you don't, but you're here anyway. That counts for something. A row of niches once held scrolls. Now they're empty alcoves, filled only with dust and moth wings. You run your hand along the stone and wonder how many fingertips have done the same. Did anyone cry here when the fire came? Did anyone whisper goodbye to the knowledge they'd spent a lifetime preserving? There's no plaque, no memorial, just silence, which ironically is the loudest kind of grief. You kneel down and find a tiny shard of glass. It catches the moonlight and splits it into tiny rainbows. It might have been part of a lens, or a lamp, or just trash. But to you, it's a relic, a remnant. Proof that someone else once stood here, reaching for something bigger than themselves. And maybe that's the point. You pocket the shard and rise again. Behind you, Alexandria breathes. Ahead, the ruins stretch like a promise. You drift past the hushed walls of Alexandria, half asleep in history now, walking where ash once settled thick and scrolls turned to cinders in the wind. But the library was never just a building, was it? It was an idea, a living one. The kind of idea that stubbornly survives even when reduced to smoke. You trace the faint outline of a doorway that used to lead to the lecture halls. Imagine the chatter, the chalk dust of ancient minds scratching at the edges of human understanding. Scholars in robes pacing, arguing about atoms or astronomy or whether the soul had weight. One of them might have even believed the brain was just a sponge cooling the blood. Because yes, that was once considered cutting-edge science. Don't worry, you're not here for a pop quiz. The sky overhead is scattered with stars now. They blink down as if nothing ever burned, like celestial gaslighters. You stretch out your arms and think, could they have really forgotten all this? The night answers with a shrug. Historians still argue whether it was Julius Caesar's soldiers who torched the first wing while trying to secure the harbour. Just a military accident in the chaos of conquest. Others claim it happened later, under Christian zealots who saw pagan texts as threats. Or even under the Caliphate, whose leaders questioned whether books that contradicted the Quran were worth preserving at all. It doesn't matter when, really. The effect was the same. Silence, where once there had been song. You pause at a crumbling step near what might have been the scribe's quarters. It's warm, oddly, as if it still remembers being touched by flame. You sit there, letting the past wrap around you like a smoke-scented blanket. And just for a moment you hear it. Not words, but the feeling of them. Echoes of voices teaching, debating, recording the moon's phases, debating fish anatomy, making lists of stars, copying down herbal remedies that might have worked. Or not. There's a record. Apocryphal, maybe exaggerated, of a man who travelled from India to Egypt just to deposit a rare treatise on elephants. Not because Alexandria needed elephant facts, but because the library had a rule. Every ship that entered Alexandria's harbour was searched, and if it carried scrolls, the originals were copied and stored. The originals sometimes kept, the copies returned. Don't ask for a library card, you'd get arrested. Some called it theft, others called it vision. Fringe theories still swirl around what exactly was lost. Some imagine secrets of flight, ancient surgery, maybe even early computers, like Antikythera's ancient Greek calculator. Maybe that's a stretch, but maybe it isn't. When you wipe out knowledge, the hole it leaves behind doesn't just echo, it reverberates. Imagine a world where every civilization's discoveries had been shared in real time, not erased and rediscovered like cosmic déjà vu. You might be dozing off in a Martian suburb by now, sipping algae cocktails under neon moons. Or not. Maybe that's exactly why the fire started. You rise and follow the scent of brine. Somewhere nearby the sea laps at the bones of a city that should have been eternal. Alexandria was a lighthouse of human curiosity, literally. The Pharos, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, once stood nearby, throwing beams of firelight across the sea for travellers, scholars and seekers alike. You can almost picture it now. Stones stacked high against storms, mirrors catching sunlight by day, fire flickering by night. It's gone too, eaten by earthquakes and time. But you squint, and maybe, just maybe, you see it in the distance, shimmering in your sleep-heavy eyes, a beacon of something that refuses to be fully lost. You come to a flat platform. The air changes here, still and reverent. A group of travellers once gathered here during Alexandria's golden age, speaking 6 different languages at once and somehow understanding each other. They left graffiti in Latin, Greek, even Phoenician. The translations vary, but one scratched note has always stood out to archaeologists. "We thought we'd stay forever." You trace the letters carved in jagged haste. Was it a joke? A wish? A curse? In the quiet, you remember that Alexandria didn't just gather knowledge, it invited it. Welcomed scholars of all creeds and kingdoms. Women taught here. One of them, Hypatia, was a mathematician, a philosopher, a stargazer. Her brilliance made her a threat. Spoiler alert, her story does not have a gentle ending, but her legacy lingers like the scent of burning parchment. And so you sit again, eyes half-lidded, mind adrift. Somewhere between the ashes of what was and the sketches of what could have been. You wonder if the gods mourned the fire, or maybe they lit it. The stars blink again. You blink back, and just before the last flame flickers out in your memory, you whisper one of those truths the library tried to preserve. Knowledge doesn't burn. Not entirely. Not forever. It just waits. Your feet barely move now, tracing the last quiet shadows of Alexandria's ghost. The night is soft and the ruins seem gentler somehow. Less like a wound, more like a scar that's finally fading. There's something about standing in a place where the past clings like mist. You can't see it. Not really. But you feel it in your skin, in your breath. Like you've walked straight into memory. The floor beneath you, what's left of it, is worn smooth by centuries of sandals and scribes, of philosophers pacing and students falling asleep during lectures about the orbit of Saturn. Honestly, you might have dozed off too, except this was no ordinary school, this was the brain of the world. You step past a shattered mosaic, blue tiles, gold trim, possibly once part of a map, a world map. The kind that didn't just show mountains and oceans, but where to find cinnamon, or what stars to sail by if you were heading east. A whisper of the globe as it was understood, long before satellites or smug apps that tell you how many steps you've taken. Historians still argue whether this final destruction came in a single day or over decades, through erosion of funding, changing rulers, shifting religions, and simple human forgetfulness. Maybe it wasn't one great blaze, but a slow, sad smoulder, scrolls left uncopied, minds chased away, halls turned into granaries or barracks. You pause near a ruined arch, and a thought tiptoes in. If the library had truly survived, uninterrupted, through every war and regime change, would we even recognise the world today? The fringe crowd loves to imagine ancient blueprints for flying machines, or steam-powered automatons buried in Alexandria's vaults. One particularly spicy theory says there was a working model of the solar system made entirely of gears and crystal. Another claims early immunology text predicted bacteria centuries before microscopes. Was any of it real? Maybe. Probably not. But wouldn't it be nice if it was? Because you feel it, don't you? That quiet ache for what we could have known, what we almost remembered, what flickered just out of reach, then vanished in a gust of smoke. The moon is high now, casting silver over broken marble. You run your fingers along the stone and think about the people who once stood exactly where you're standing. A scribe scratching out a translation of a Babylonian star chart. A philosopher muttering about ethics, barefoot and distracted. A student clutching a wax tablet and hoping the professor didn't notice they hadn't done the assigned reading. Alexandria was messy, flawed, brilliant, full of contradictions, home to both Ptolemaic kings and common tradesmen, to temple keepers and wandering mystics, a crossroads of curiosity, a chaos of learning, and still, even in ruin, it teaches you something. The building burned, the scrolls turned to dust, but the hunger that built the library, the relentless, joyful need to know, that's harder to kill. You carry it now. Maybe that's why you wandered here tonight, half asleep and ankle-deep in imagined ash. Maybe that's what Alexandria really left behind. Not answers, but the urge to keep asking. You linger a little longer, letting the silence settle around you. Somewhere, in some dusty corner of the modern world, a few charred scrolls still exist. Blackened at the edges, their words barely legible. But someone's reading them. Someone's trying to piece it all back together. And you've walked the halls, felt the flame, met the ghosts, not bad for a night's sleep. And now, as the embers fade and the last echoes of parchment and footfall drift into the distance, you find yourself sinking into stillness. The weight of lost centuries slips from your shoulders, the questions soften, and the night settles in. The library, once a towering symbol of all human thought, rests quietly now in your memory, not as a ruin, but as a feeling, a quiet hum of wonder that pulses gently beneath your ribs. You carry it with you, even as the stars blink slowly above and your breath begins to deepen. There's nothing left to figure out right now, no scrolls to decipher, no maps to follow. Just the comfort of soft shadows and the hush of distant waves. Let your body loosen, your thoughts meander, and your eyes flutter shut. The scholars are quiet now. The scribes have laid down their styluses. Even the wind through the columns has nothing left to whisper. It's all done. It's all okay. The stories can wait until morning. You're safe. You are warm. And the past, however complex, however smoky, is gently folding itself away. Drift now, slowly, like a scroll tucked back into its shelf. You've earned it. Sweet dreams. 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 Sweet dreams.